how we get to the point where white women, you know, can clutch the pearls, cry, and cause, you know, people to go to jail and worse, death, children, men, women, anybody. And what people don't understand is this has a precedence. This has been going on for a long time. And what I'm going to be showing in this PowerPoint is that context, so that we can understand why next week we're going to be inviting attorneys on to figure out how we bring into law something that suggests that this behavior is felony behavior. You don't get to lie and put people's lives in danger because you've been inconvenienced. You don't get to do that.
Message.
And for some reason, I don't know, everybody seems to see this happen over and over again, and it's like a big joke. It's not a big joke. It needs to be dealt with, and people need to be held accountable, namely white women who feel that they have instant innocence by virtue of their whiteness. So again, people who know me know that even as a clinician, through the many, many years I was in private practice, I've only had one rule, tell me the truth. I don't care. I was dealing with male and female adolescent adult, male and female prostitutes or street workers or night workers, whatever the appropriate term is. When I was working with folks who were homeless, working with people who were in prison, it didn't matter, because I don't care who you are, just tell me the truth. Because I do believe that truthfulness is a foundation of all the virtues of the world of humanity. And I believe that if you aren't telling the truth, you're not going to be well. And I think our pathology as a country is in our denial of the issue of racism and white supremacy. That's why we're going down, because we won't deal with the truth. Next slide. So May 26th, Eliza Orleans, this is a public defender in Manhattan. Here's what she says. This is serious. This happened today in Manhattan. As a public defender for over a decade, I've tried cases where the Manhattan DA uses a hysterical 911 call as categorical evidence of guilt. Usually there's no video like this to refute it, meaning the video that just was shown with this woman in Central Park. Now, this is a white public defender, a white woman who's saying that in the past, all you needed was to listen to the hysterical 911 call. In fact, the attorneys would go, just listen to the call. And now we know you just can't listen to the call. A white person calls the police on a black man. The police arrive and take the side of his white accuser. Refusing to believe his version of events, he is arrested and arraigned. An outrageous bail amount is set. His family can't afford to buy his freedom. He gets sent to Rikers Island, where he sits for days, months, or sometimes years. Eventually, his case is resolved in some way, either because the charges are dismissed or because he decides to plead guilty to a lesser charge. In the meantime, he may have lost his job, his home, his children, or some combination of the three. Nothing like that happened to Cooper, thankfully, but the elements of the problem are plain to see. Now, this is a white public defender from New York. This is an attorney. And again, prior to the video, all we would need is the 911 call. Listen to this panicked, passionate, fearful 911 call. And we watched this woman do a 911 call and was lying the entire time, becoming more emotional to bring the police on to create this image of danger.
Message.
That's what she did. We watched her do it. Now, remember, in the past, there's no video. All you have is that 911 call. I want you to follow me with this because the implications are serious in terms of what could happen to someone. Next slide. Now, again, one of the things that happens, and because I was one of those people back in the 80s that, they hired for diversity training, and I immediately ceased and desist from doing it because it was an absolute and complete waste of time. Why? There's a big difference between equity and social justice versus diversity. What are you doing?
I didn't do anything. It's doing its own thing. Okay. It's back.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the belief that workplace diversity can bring increased productivity, new ideas, and therefore higher profits appeals particularly to corporations. Although diversity training may make good business sense, the model falls terribly short of the comprehensive racial justice approach required for progressive social change. What too often gets lost in the muddy waters of multicultural awareness is any analysis of power and the ways racist attitudes and organizational culture operate. A racial justice approach requires an organizational transformation of power relations. And see, what diversity training did was everybody came in, checked off that they were there, and nothing changed. There was a little fruit and festival. You had music and ethnic music and people in ethnic garb, and everybody clapped, said they were there, ate the little refreshments, and went back to life as usual. There was no change systemically. There was no change in the power dynamic. There was no change in the empowerment of people who have been oppressed in those toxic, hostile environments. Next slide. Dehumanization. I'm bringing this up because, and again, you can get all of this if you read my book, although there's some things in here that's not in the book, but dehumanization is a unique problem that has existed in this country since its inception. It is how, in fact, America, largely white America, embraced its strong Christian ethic that everything's okay, because they somehow placed a whole group of people, in this case, not just us, but other people too, but African Americans, as not quite fully human, which justified and legitimized everything that came afterwards. So, next slide. So we have to come in, the first thing that we have to recognize, and this is something I say in all my presentations, is that every major institution in America had to be complicit with the dehumanization of Black people. They had to be complicit with 339 years at least of slavery. They had to be complicit with all of the laws that oppressed people who were different. And the way they did it was they said, well, scientifically speaking, okay, so now we're bringing in the bastion of science. Now, this individual, Carl von Linnaeus, you all know, he's a father of anthropology. Everybody who is an anthropologist is cringing at this point because they know he was categorically insane. But here's what he said. This man is best known for the classification of things, species, phylum, genus. He basically looked around and categorized and classified things. And some of those things, he did an extraordinarily good job. But then he also, look at the date, 1707 to 1778, had to reconcile the contradiction of a country that prides itself on democracy and freedom, that was committing genocide against Native Americans at the time and enslaving African people. So how do you reconcile, send us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all? How do you reconcile that when you are obliterating, destroying an entire group of people to take their lands, mind you, and then you're going to enslave a whole nother group of people didn't ask to come, right? And all manner of horrific things. Well, he again now is going to classify, and I want you to stay with me, because in order for you to feel okay about it, is you have to justify what you're doing, and you do so by relabeling the people you are oppressing in such a way that it justifies what you're doing to them. So let's see how he describes people. By the way, there's not a shred of science here.
Message.
Just so you know up front. He starts describing Homo Americanus. Now, just guess in your mind who that might be. Well, that would be Native. What did he say about Native American people? He says they're reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, regulated by customs. Okay, no science there. Homo Europaeus, white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Clearly no science there. Homo Asiaticus, that's Asian, sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinion. But now let's look at Homo Afer. They are Black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. Not a shred of science. Now, even though there's no science here, my students, when I was teaching at the university, teaching my 10-week course, which people are taking in my class, of course, white people would start feeling dissonance, cognitive dissonance, because, oh my goodness, wait a minute. But Dr. Joy, look at the year, 1707 to 1778. You know, these people were ignorant. They didn't know. I said, yeah, but do you not still hear these attributions 2020 to Black people when there's not a shred of science here? Not a shred. Next slide. And this will tell you why. Why? It's because nobody checked his Vita, clearly. Like everybody's checking mine right now because of what I'm saying. Linnaeus, after 1 week, received his PhD for a 13-page dissertation from the Dutch University of Harderwijk, which one historian of science designated as a mail order institution. The University of Harderwijk was known for selling degrees. And there's a saying in the Netherlands for a person whose scientific knowledge is questionable, oh, he's from the University of Harderwijk. So here's a man who said that.
Okay, 2 things. Breathe. He's starting to go too fast. People gotta hear what you're saying. Okay.
All right, next slide. What's the bell? What's the bell? Okay, so now just a little history. And I want you to contrast even the manner in which folks are depicted. I say that whenever you see people dressed up like this, you should get concerned. Okay, just get concerned because it's going to be a problem. All right. So now we know, based on the Constitutional Convention of 1787, was where the North was trying to eliminate slavery. They were actually abolitionists. They were saying, we're trying to eliminate slavery at the 1787 Constitutional Convention. They were trying to stop it. Southerners were of course, trying to maintain slavery. So at this point, it came down to, well, the more people residing in a state, the more representation that state has and the more power it can wield. Well, the Southerners said, well, we want to count the enslaved Africans. And the Northerners says, you can't count the enslaved Africans. You say they're not fully human. So the agreed upon decision, which is called the 3/5 compromise, is rather than counting every African as a person, we're going to count 3/5 of the entire population. Hence, here's this statement. Now look at the way the man's dressed. Right, we see this is how he dressed. Very dignified. But look at what he's saying. Blacks are inhabitants, but is debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave is divested of 2/5 of the man.
Message.
You don't even know what the hell he's talking about here. But it just rolls off the tongue. And oh my God, look how it must be okay. This is James Madison, right? So again, we have to understand that these things were institutionalized many years ago. Next slide. So now we have Thomas Jefferson. I talk about him a lot. I end my book with a soliloquy from Thomas Jefferson, where he says, indeed, I tremble for my country when I consider that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. This man was plagued with dissonance to his dying days, and he didn't free his enslaved Africans even upon his death. But here's what he did say, and I want you to understand, when you say Thomas Jefferson said it, well, it must be what? True. We're talking about Thomas Jefferson, someone who stood for freedom and religious freedom and all these different things, but these are his words. I can't make it up. He says, blacks smell bad and were physically unattractive. His words. Little inconsistent with his behavior, but his words nonetheless. And then he goes so far as to say we required less sleep. Now I want to unpack this for you, because all of this is to justify what you're doing to people. We're saying they're physically unattractive. Well, he was sleeping with a child. She was 13 years old, Sally Hemings, when she came into his employ, and was 16 by the time she became pregnant. There's another word we give to people who do that, to children. Then he goes on to say we required less sleep. Well, we have to ask the question, what in the world would prompt him to make that statement? Because what was the work day for an enslaved African? It was sunrise to sunset. And we know it because we have the forensic evidence based on the bones that were found in the burial ground in New York. We know that they worked so hard that the muscle detached itself from the bone as a result of exertion. You lazy people, you.